What is up everyone, Hero276 here and welcome to today's video and welcome back to my channel. Before we begin today's video, I just want to start off with a handful of apologies. Firstly, I do want to apologize for not uploading a short last night. I had a jazz band concert with some of my friends and that ran a little bit later than expected. Number two, I wanted to also apologize because I misled you. I was originally going to feature my Double Dark and Fire team, but that team ended up costing me 200 elo, so I wanted to use a much spicier and much more positive set with Gengar and Haunter. Now, Gengar and Haunter are two extreme glass cannons in the Great League. Both of them have like somewhere in the ballpark of 155 to 160 attack. I think Haunter's is even at 161, but they're both extremely frail, and especially against their weaknesses, can particularly struggle. So I paired it up with Empoleon on the lead to help shore up those weaknesses, particularly to some of the ground types and some of the psychic types. So yeah, the team went positive. I had about a 58% win rate with the team, not something I would recommend using for climbing whatsoever, but it was certainly a lot of fun trying out the team. So before I dive into today's video, I just want to give a special shout out to my Spotify page. If you're enjoying the music used in this video and other videos, please consider checking out my Spotify. You can have access to all of my music and you can buy them for $4.99. And if you don't want to spend the money, that's totally okay. You can follow me on the Spotify page and you'll still have access to all the music in app. That being said, let's dive right into today's video. And we are starting today's video off with a lead Empoleon into Bronzong. This is a confusion user, so it's great to keep it away from the Gengar and the Haunter. So I'm going to overfarm here by one, throwing in between the confusions and getting off the Hydro Cannon. The opponent shields up the first one, so whatever they shield, I'm going to shield up in return. My opponent has enough for the payback. I elect to shield, and it is unfortunately the Psyshock bait. I'm going to go for the next Hydro Cannon. This will do some very solid damage onto the Bronzong, but my opponent double shields. In that case, I'm also going to double shield. My opponent is at enough for the payback once again. I commit the shield, and it is the payback. A good shield by me. I overfarm. My opponent tries for a catch. They send in Whiscash, and with an energy lead, Empoleon should be able to two-shot the Shadow Whiscash. I go for Hydro Cannon number one, and yeah, Hydro Cannon is going to two-shot, and that's very nice, because Whiscash has positive matchups up against both the Gengar and the Haunter in the back. My opponent sends back in the Bronzong. Confusions do a lot of damage, but we're able to get to the Shadow Punch, and now we don't need to take any more confusions. The opponent's final Pokemon is Skeledirge, and this game is over. All I need to do, go for the Shadow Punch. Shadow Punch will nearly KO. The opponent is left on just a fraction of HP. I send in Empoleon, force them to throw their energy. This charge move will KO, but I could just send in the Haunter. One Shadowclaw should be enough, and we take the win. Hopping into game number two, picking up a lead Empoleon into Annihilate. I absolutely have to switch out of this matchup. It's a good thing that I am, because Gengar actually triple resists the counters, and same with the Haunter. My opponent sends in Mantine, gonna go for the Shadow Punch. My opponent interestingly decides to shield it up. So from here, I'm just gonna let the move go through. I'm totally fine with the shield advantage. The opponent goes for the Aerial Ace, not enough to KO. Gengar can withstand that, which is a very rare thing to say. I get off the Shadow Punch, and Mantine is in the yellow. I'm actually perfectly okay with this. I can send in the Empoleon, and Empoleon is a wall to energy from the Mantine. The opponent will fire off a charge move, but I can take this. Whatever it is, my opponent actually goes for the double resisted Ice Beam. It's definitely better to go Aerial Ace since that's only single resisted. Opponent will now fire off the Aerial Ace. Aerial Ace will actually do more than the Ice Beam. And from here, I could just overfarm and get off the Drill Peck. Drill Peck here will KO the Mantine from this health range, but they decide to shield it up, and I'm going to send in Haunter to get ahead on energy. My opponent is able to make another charge move. I will shield it up. It is the Aerial Ace. My opponent gets farmed down by the Shadowclaws. They send in a Crustle. This is not good. Smackdowns are doing a ton of damage, and I'm going to need my Haunter to have a Shadow Punch ready to go for the Annihilate in the back. I'm really hoping that Shadow Punch is enough to KO here. It is not, but we do get the Shadowclaw through and don't take any Smackdown damage. My opponent only has the Annihilate left, but all I need to do is shield this up and get off a Shadow Punch. Haunter makes it to the Shadow Punch. This will be enough to KO the Annihilate, even though it's a pretty weak move, and we take the win. Hopping into game number 3, and we see a tough lead Empoleon into Feraligator. Shadowclaws hit my backline for super effective damage, so I am forced to basically stay in here.
My opponent throws after 5. This is only the Hydro Cannon, and I will be able to absorb this. Then my opponent pivots out of the matchup and into a Lickitung. This is absolutely terrible, but at the very least, I do have an energy head start, so these Hydro Cannons should really be able to add up. I overfarm, the opponent gets off a charge move, I have to shield this. Lickitung would absolutely destroy my backline, so I'm going to elect to shield. The opponent will probably be shielding up this next Hydro Cannon in return. Hydro Cannon will be drawing a shield from the Lickitung. I'm able to get off another Hydro Cannon, really hoping my opponent decides to let this one go through, and they do, and Lickitung goes down. They still have the Feraligator, however, and these Shadow Claws are really tearing into the Gengar, but I'm able to make it to the Shadow Punch. My opponent will likely be shielding this one up, and they do. Am I able to get to another Shadow Punch? I am not. It's time to put my faith into the Haunter with a shield. My opponent is very close to 2 charge moves. They will fire off the Hydro Cannon, and now, can I get the Shadow Claw farm down? I commit the shield. I do not risk it. I throw the Shadow Punch. Shadow Punch will KO the Feraligator, and that's going to turn out to be a pretty big mistake. I could have gotten the farm down, and in the back is a Powder Snow Shadow Alola Ninetales. Had I gotten the farm down, I would have been able to make it to 2 Shadow Punches and get the KO, but unfortunately, I decided to play it safe, and I end up losing the game. Looking to get back on the right track in the next match, picking up a lead into Shadow Glade. I will at least stay in this matchup because the Psycho Cuts are resisted, and the Steel Wings are really adding up. My opponent has enough for the close combat. I decide to shield, and it's unfortunately the Leaf Blade. My opponent then pivots into a Lickitung, so we are in now a negative matchup with an energy head start and down a shield. So let's see what we can do here. The opponent lets the first Hydro Cannon go through. At the very least, we do resist the body slams here from the Lickitung, and we're not in Power Whip range either. My opponent shields up the next Hydro Cannon. I will let this next move go through. It is the Power Whip, but it's not enough to KO. I'm going to farm up and get off the next Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon will be pressuring a shield for my opponent. They double shield the Lickitung, and now I have to send in the Haunter and look to get ahead on energy. My opponent will be throwing a double resisted body slam. That still does a lot of damage for something that's double resisted. I'm not going to be able to Shadow Claw down a normal type, so I'm going to go for the Ice Punch and take out the Lickitung. My opponent sends in their third, and it's a Whiscash. I'm able to get off the Shadow Punch, and that as well looked like a CMP tie. If that is a huge break for me, and it was a CMP tie. From here, I just let this go through, and I send in the Gengar. And what I'm actually going to do is farm up 4 and look for a catch onto the Empoleon, where we will be able to save our shield in case the Glade has any residual energy. Yes, I know it is resisted, but Gengar is still extremely frail, so I farm up to 5, wait till they get to the Mud Bomb, and win CMP. Shadow Punch will KO the Whiscash. My opponent sends back in the Glade, but we have the Shadow Punch ready to go. Shadow Punch will be KOing the Shadow Glade, and we take the win. Hopping into the next game, and we see a pretty terrible lead into Shadow Whiscash. My opponent will be able to threaten the knockout here with the Mud Bomb, and I'm going to be outpaced as well, so I'm going to have to force a shield early. My opponent will be going for the Mud Bomb as soon as they get it. I decide to go for the Overfarm and the CMP tie on the Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon would do big damage to the Whiscash. They let it through, and this is actually really good for me. Even though I'm down a shield, I can use this to get ahead on energy with the Gengar, so I send it in, and we get the Shadowclaw farm down. My opponent sends in Dragalge, and this is really bad. Dragon Tails do a lot of damage, and my opponent can just farm down from here if they decide to shield at the Dragalge. I'm able to get off another Shadow Punch, and Shadow Punch should be forcing a shield for my opponent, and now they're down on shields. I send in Haunter. My opponent immediately switches out into an Annihilate, and this is perfect. They don't farm up to the Shadow Ball. I do not need to shield this. Ice Punch still does a lot of damage, but counters are triple resisted. I get the full Shadowclaw farm down, leaving with the Ice Punch for the Dragalge. This has to KO. It does KO, and we take the win. Hopping into the next one, picking up a lead into Skarmory. This is actually pretty good for the Empoleon because we do outpace to the Hydro Cannons, and we can hit for neutral damage while my opponent is stuck going for resisted damage. Interestingly, this opponent is running Air Slash on the Skarmory. You definitely want to be running Steel Wing. It's just a better all-around move. So my opponent is going to be going for a resisted charge move. I will call the Sky Attack, and it is just the Sky Attack. I'm able to get off another Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon will KO from this health range. The opponent will commit the shield. I'm going to pivot into the Gengar. Gengar lures out a Quagsire, and this is really good with shield advantage. I'm going to shield up, and I should be able to get off multiple moves versus the Quagsire. But you know what? I'm feeling extremely risky today. I overfarm, and I make it to the Focus Blast. Does my opponent decide to shield it? Unfortunately, they do. But I'm able to get off a parting Shadow Punch. I kind of wish I did this a little bit in reverse order, but either way, we do get some valuable damage onto the Quagsire. Opponent will be firing off their energy. This is a very easy no shield for me, and what I can do is send in the Haunter, and I will be looking for a Shadowclaw farm down. I'm going to wait my switch clock, send in the Haunter. Haunter, not able to get the farm down. I'm forced to catch the Mud Bomb onto the Empoleon, but at least we do make the catch. The opponent tries to snipe with the Skarmory, and they're able to do so, which forces my final shield. But at the very least, they're now switch locked, and I will be able to farm down. As well, if they send in their third, they're going to be unable to catch. It's a Slowbro, and with an energy head start, Haunter is looking in a great position. As long as we survive the confusions, confusion gets us very low, but I'm able to get off the double Shadow Punches necessary to pick up the knockout. My opponent only has the Quagsire left, and we Shadowclaw farm down for the win. Hopping into the penultimate match, picking up a lead Empoleon into Metacham. I will immediately pivot into one of my two ghost types. I send in the Gengar. The opponent responds with a Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn can hit for nice damage here with the Power Whip, but it is resisted. Gengar might be glassy, but it can definitely take this energy. I'm going to overfarm and then go for the Focus Blast. This would be so nice to land, and it one-shots the Ferrothorn. Opponent sends in their third. It's Toxapex, and now that I know this opponent's full team, I just straight up win the game. I can align the Empoleon onto the Toxapex and my Haunter onto the Metacham. Gengar is also able to get this Toxapex fairly low with a couple of Shadow Punches. I send in Empoleon, they switch Metacham, and I send in Haunter. And now Haunter, with two shields, should be able to comfortably get rid of the Metacham. I shield up in case it is the Psychic. It is not the Psychic, it is unfortunately an Ice Punch. I do decide to throw here because I don't want to have to go down two shields. The opponent will be shielding themselves, and I do get the Shadowclaw farm down before they're able to make it to another charge move, and that essentially just wins me the game. Haunter has too much energy. I decide to go for the Shadow Punch. Looks like my opponent has left the app. Shadow Punch is not enough to KO, and that was a CMP tie as well, which is probably why they rage quit the app. This is going to take a while, so my opponent is going to go for the Brine. Brine will not do anything, and that is a rare sight. Haunter absorbing a charge move, and we take the win. One final game leading into Vigoroth. This is a counter user. I will switch into one of my two ghost types. The opponent responds with Dragonite. Now Dragonite here will take big damage from the Shadow Punches. Dragonite is very glassy, they will likely commit the shield, and because they stayed in with the Vigoroth for so long, I have enough of an energy head start to be able to make two Shadow Punches, forcing both shields from the Shadow Dragonite. At this point, I'm going to wait my switch clock, send in the Empoleon, and I'll probably look to go for the full Steel Wing farm down. I will shield once to respect the superpower. The opponent goes straight for it, so a good shield on my part, and because of the defense fall, I'm able to get the full Steel Wing farm down. The opponent will send back in the Vigoroth, but Hydro Cannon will add up here. From here, I'm going to send in the Haunter with the shield. The opponent has Politoed in the back, and from here, I see a win condition. I'm going to soft lose this matchup and not invest any shields into the Haunter. So, my opponent will be going for the Weather Ball here. Guess what? Haunter actually lives it on 1 HP, and we're able to get off the Shadow Punch. I'm really hoping this is not enough to KO, and that's actually perfect. I send in the Empoleon, get the Steel Wing through. The opponent just has the Vigoroth, but my opponent surrenders, and that is game, set, and match. Overall, this was a fun team. Haunter and Gengar should never be paired together because they are both insanely glassy with very high attack stats, but very limited bulk. It goes without saying that I definitely do not recommend this team for climbing, but it was insanely fun to use, and even landing a Focus Blast on that Ferrothorn earlier was a lot of fun. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.